Well, hello and welcome everyone to this edition of Legal AF with the Midas Touch Network. I'm Lisa Graves from Court Accountability Action, along with my wonderful partner, Alex Aronson from Court Accountability Action. And today we have a special guest. They're always special, but I'm really excited to invite David Sirota to join us for a conversation about his forthcoming new book, Master Plan, which is based on the extraordinarily, informative podcast that the Lever did called Master Plan. And I was honored to help contribute in some ways to that terrific piece of work, but really the legwork, the analysis, the tremendous efforts by Dave Sirota and his team to shine a light on this master plan that we're seeing implemented right now. We're seeing the effects of this longtime master plan. I'm just so excited to have you join us, Dave. So welcome to Legal AF
Thank you.
on the Midas Touch Network.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Alex, do you want to start off with a question and I'll jump in after?
Sure. Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks for joining us, David. Great to see you. It feels like for most Americans that even ones that are watching the news pretty closely, paying attention to what's going on, you might wake up and wonder, like, how did things get so bad so fast? But having followed your career, I don't know if you remember, we actually met. I was a baby youth organizer. You were doing some independent coverage of some organizing we were doing. I was in my young early 20s, but you were really on to this problem, this festering problem of corporate influence in our politics in a bipartisan way, right? Not as a left-right issue, not as a Republican-Democrat issue, but as a big systemic problem in our politics. And now that you've woven it all together so masterfully in Master Plan, I think if folks were to listen to that, you'd be like, oh, but having tracked your work and been attuned to some of these dynamics myself, it makes sense that we're here now. But how do you see it all having come together to bring us to a point where corruption is so prevalent and so done out in the open that there seems to be no shame for it, and certainly no accountability for it? Where did this come from?
It's a great question, and I think in some ways it does feel like we've all woken up and corruption is now so endemic that it's the water that we swim in, right? I mean, that corruption has been so normalized that there's not really, in a lot of days, it feels like there's not really a difference between what is politics, what is government, and what is corruption. It's all sort of bleeding all together. And one term for that, of course, is a kleptocracy. And I think that it is important to understand that we're not just waking up into something that happened overnight. This was something that happened over many decades. And it didn't just happen by force of nature. It happened, as we show, it was the result of a master plan. A group of people with a specific set of ideas, a specific set of goals, a specific ideology, knew that to be able to implement that, they had to do a specific set of things. In specific, to deregulate the campaign finance system, to make it easier to buy elections, buy politicians, and buy public policy. That all of these things bleed together into the results that we're getting. So this story starts about 50 plus years ago in the early 1970s, in the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, where Watergate was really America's highest profile, certainly at the time, dark money scandal. That the break-in was funded by essentially the darkest of dark money, corporate money, dark money, et cetera, et cetera. And out of that came what were then the modern campaign finance laws, where America had woken up to the idea that corruption had gotten completely out of control and there was a backlash to it. And the modern campaign finance laws were created. And over the course of the next 50 years, the people who wanted to be able to buy our politics ended up working to get rid of those post-Watergate era laws and really fully deregulate the campaign finance and anti-corruption laws that existed in this country over the course of court cases, stopping legislative reforms and the like, to the point where now, yes, last year, the Supreme Court effectively ruled that you can essentially buy political outcomes. You can literally give gifts to public officials after they give you favors that enrich you.
After
Yeah.
it's got to be after at
Got to be
least.
after.
Gratuity.
That's
No,
right.
no,
That's right.
you said it correctly. You said it correctly. I mean, we've still got corruption laws. So if you have to wait until after you receive the corrupt official act,
Right. And
I
I think
mean,
people who are listening to this, they might think that we're exaggerating here, but this is literally what happened. To culminate a lot of this was a ruling that the Supreme Court handed down saying effectively that if a public official does a favor that enriches a donor and the donor then gives them money after that, that is no longer a bribe. That is a so-called gratuity, and it is legal. Now, I bring that up because that is emblematic of what has happened. And again, the court cases, obviously crescendoing in Citizens United, which then unleashed more court cases, but all of those did not just happen accidentally. There was a deliberate plan. And I want to get to a really important point here about why there was this plan. And I think we have to understand that the conservative movement, the billionaires who fund the conservative movement, had understood that to pass the policies they want to pass, the self-enriching policies that benefit disproportionately them, they had to short-circuit democracy. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, social movements were making great progress in using the democratic process, elections and the like, to essentially put pressure on the government to deliver the policies that benefit millions and millions of people. We're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, housing policy, the Voting Rights Act, civil rights laws, the creation of the EPA, et cetera, et cetera. And the conservative movement understood that democracy, they had a problem with democracy. If you are a very rich person, you're a CEO, you run a corporation, you're a mogul, this democratic process is not doing what you want it to do. And so you have to essentially try, if you want your agenda enshrined in law, you have to find a way to short circuit that democratic process. So I bring that up because what we have to understand the deregulation of the campaign finance system as, in my view, is an attack on democracy itself. That the people who want an agenda that they couldn't pass through a government that was reflecting what the mass public wants, has to rig the process so that they have disproportionate power over that government. And that, to me, is what the master plan, really the motivating force behind that master plan.
Yeah, that's just so well said, David. One of the things that struck me as I've looked at these issues over these, past several years is how that initial memo by Lewis Powell, right before he was nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in the aftermath of his role defending big tobacco from just common sense labeling of cigarettes, and also his role in trying to thwart the implementation of Brown versus Board of Education, he gets rewarded with this Supreme Court post. And one of the public reactions to his memo was from Charles Koch, the soon-to-be billionaire, not yet billionaire Charles Koch, who said the Powell memo didn't go far enough because it didn't tie enough strings. And then, one of the things I discovered was that it was Charles Koch who underwrote the litigation against that federal campaign law in 1976 that resulted in 1976 in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, which was both affirming of those federal anti-corruption laws you mentioned, and then also dismantled some of them. And then 20 years later, according to the Wall Street Journal, it was Charles Koch's operation in the 1996 election that marked the return, and this is a quote from the Wall Street Journal, marked the return of massive anonymous contributions to American politics after a 20-year hiatus. That was Koch. And then you have Koch exploiting, fast forward again, you have Koch exploiting that 2010 Citizens United decision. You have Koch prevailing in the subsequent decision involving Americans for Prosperity to sort of limit even state regulators from understanding more about who's funding these C4 groups that emerged in a stronger force, basically, from that Citizens United decision and related cases. And now we have this situation in which billionaires are, as Alex said, shameless in trying to exert their influence over our elections, over state court elections, over federal elections, presidential elections, congressional elections, and more. What are your thoughts, not just on how we got here, that path, but where we're going?
Well, I think that we are now at a point where Charles Koch saying the Powell memo doesn't go far enough. I think they've taken it arguably farther than the Powell memo itself. Like, in other words, he's put those beliefs, and he and his fellow moguls have put those beliefs into action to the point where they have gone beyond. Citizens United deregulated the campaign finance system and basically took the Buckley v. Vallejo case from the 70s. Money is speech, and took it to its logical extreme. But they have subsequently moved into beyond deregulating the campaign finance system. They've moved into deregulating, or at least making it impossible to enforce actual anti-corruption laws. And I think it's worth taking a moment to understand the difference, right? Campaign finance laws are what can you give a politician when they're running for office to boost their campaign, to help them get elected or reelected. Anti-corruption laws are supposed to be the real baseline, right? I mean, even beyond that, right? A politician is in office. Can you personally enrich them? Can you put money not just into their campaign, but into their wallet, into their bank account? And we are now at a point where that is being litigated, and those anti-corruption laws and the enforcement of them are being dismantled to the point where it's not entirely clear to me, and I think it's certainly not entirely clear to a lot of politicians who play in the gray area, what is legal and what is illegal, right?
And they're changing it all the time, right? I mean, that decision,
exactly.
that gratuity decision is extraordinary. Sorry to interject and jump in over you, Alex.
No, you're right.
That decision was not just an outrageous decision in and of itself, as the dissent pointed out, that this just turns on its head the notion of corruption, but it also was issued in the context of the Supreme Court embroiled in the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the Supreme Court, in terms of the graft, and in my view, the grift of Clarence Thomas and some of the other members of the court, and John Roberts' active efforts to thwart ethics reforms, enforceable ethics. So the brazenness of that decision, not only to dismantle federal law writ large for politicians in terms of, allowing these gratuities, but also to do it in the midst of this court's own corruption. It just was a 1-2 punch, in my view.
I totally agree. And I think it's a reminder, frankly, that the court will not save us. The court will not save democracy. I think a lot of people are hoping that John Roberts will become this moderating force. And certainly here and there, the court will be given a chance to do something like horrible or not horrible. And once in a while, it chooses to do something not horrible. But that is not going to be the shield that saves this democracy. I think where we have to look is, frankly, for now, the state and local level, that's where I'm finding some inspiration. You have seen in the last few years, you've seen ballot measures to try to roll back the power of dark money. You saw an election, for instance, very recently in New York City. The New York City election, to my mind, you can look at the ideology and the policies that Zohran Mamdani campaigned on, the winner of that Democratic primary. But I think you can zoom out further and say, listen, here was a guy who was outspent with $30 million of money spent against him, oligarch money spent against him, and the city's system of public financing of elections that gave qualifying candidates access to public resources to run their campaigns, resources that don't come with the expectation of legislative favors, that was enough to make that candidate competitive. To me, that is a huge moment for those who want to start clawing our democracy back, that a campaign was able to defy the demands of big money donors, not only run competitively, but win a decisive victory in the biggest city in the country. To me, I look there and I say, okay, that is a situation in which corruption was not able to win out. And if that can be replicated, and if those ballot measures, like the anti-dark money ballot measure in Arizona, as an example, not exactly a super blue state, if that is able to win, to me, that's one of the things that can, those are some of the examples that can be acted upon now, knowing, of course, that Congress and Washington still are completely mired in and gridlocked by the kind of corruption we're talking about.
I have so many thoughts, and I'm not sure that they will come together to form a complete one or lead to a question. But I just want to dive in on some of these dynamics because it strikes me that after all of this constitutional wreckage that really began in earnest with Citizens United, but has roots, of course, in earlier cases from the master plan era in the '70s. You've mentioned Buckley v. Vallejo, and then of course there's the Bilotti case. A number of these cases working toward this status quo where corruption is legal and campaign contributions effectively cannot be regulated, independent expenditures, now even the kind of coordination, the non-coordination principle that Citizens United really leaned on, that's going to be up for grabs. As we just learned this week, the Supreme Court is going to take J.D. Vance's challenge to that law. What strikes me, though, and I'm glad you brought up the Mamdani election and almost the reflexive attacks on Mamdani, really pretty disgraceful from some of the elements of the Democratic establishment. But a lot of it, I think, is rooted in this sort of old guard sense of power and control that we see from the Democratic establishment and political establishments generally. But a lot of it does seem to be linked to money and the extent to which the Democratic Party at the national level certainly has become deeply dependent on corporate money, on having big money fill its campaign coffers in this status quo. Meanwhile, we've seen an ascendant strain of, I would say it's sort of pseudo-populist, but an ascendant strain of populism emerge on the right from the MAGA base, people like Steve Bannon, that folks like Vance and folks like Trump have really embraced to great political success. Is it the case, do you think, as somebody that watches the Democratic Party really closely, are the Democrats behind on this? I certainly saw that the support for things like dark money reform really starting to diminish in my time and working in the Senate as it became clear just they needed the money to keep going.
Yeah, look, I think that when you look at the fact that Democratic senators, as an example, have mostly, if not all, lined up officially, and let's underscore officially, behind the Disclose Act to try to bring more transparency to dark money. I think what that says to us is this is a party that understands its base is disgusted with corruption, and it's a party that wants to, in some ways, virtue signal that it understands the base's anger about this. But it doesn't signal necessarily that the party as a whole is really serious about actually doing something on these issues. That it's not really central to what the party, when it has power, really acts on as a central orthodoxy of the Democratic Party. I mean, as an example, both Biden and Barack Obama, when they were presidents, this is one, important but sort of granular detail of an example. They didn't use their power over the SEC, for instance, to require corporations disclose their dark money spending. They could do that. They didn't do it. It signals that they're not entirely serious about these causes. And I think you're right to say part of the reason why they're not serious is because they're swimming in the same corruption, and the incumbents in that party are benefiting from the same corruption that we're talking about, right? I mean, this is truly a bipartisan, transpartisan, nonpartisan problem in that the people who are elected at the highest reaches of the government are overwhelmingly the masters of the current corrupt system and therefore are most resistant to changing that system which got them the power that they now enjoy. So this is going to take a sort of constant set of demands from the bottom up to force really both parties, but certainly the Democratic Party, to be much more serious about this.
Well, I really appreciate both of you setting that forth. And I think it does present a real challenge because I hear Democrats talk about the fact that you cannot unilaterally disarm in this climate without, basically at the, federal level losing. And at the same time, you have this big money just growing in power in ways that basically make these members into sort of serfs of the corporations that are threatening them. And we've even seen that obviously in Musk's threats as well over the big ugly billionaire bailout bill. But the other component of that really is that the Republicans refuse to even sign on to the Disclose Act, to disclosure, the baseline of disclosure, which Russ Feingold back in the day after Citizens United called weak tea. Disclosure is the least of it. That's just the bare minimum. Could we see who's giving money, in what ways through these outside vehicles that dwarfs the amount of money being raised directly by the candidates themselves? Although, as Alex points out, if Vance gets his way and the court goes along with him, which I suspect it will, it will be no more difference, even though there's sort of a legal technical difference at present. It's not real in my view, in the realist sense. But this corruption that has just swamped us is extraordinary, and the Democrats have not done enough about it. But just to be fair, the Republicans have affirmatively
100%.
obstructed every single effort to reform it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point about disclosure, right? I mean, that's how far the Overton window has shifted. Overton window, this sort of technical term for when the center of a debate shifts. And we have gone, since the master plan has been executed, we have gone from the post-Watergate era of campaign finance needs to be regulated. There needs to be pretty serious, certainly for the time, donor disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. We've gone from that to now where you have one party that will not even sign its name to the idea, much less the legislation, to the notion that who is buying elections needs to be disclosed. That's the Republican Party. And you have another party that will sign its name to that, but won't really, as a whole party, won't really center and use all the levers of power at its disposal to try to create just that disclosure, right? So you're right. There's what I think is part of the solution here, which is much stronger regulation, more public financing of elections, where candidates who run for office can raise money in ways that don't force them to go to billionaires to beg them for money in exchange for legislative favors, where you have a public financing system. That's where I think the debate should be. But we're still only debating whether all the current spending, all the current corruption, whether the public even has a right to know that it's going on, right? Yeah. In a detailed way. That's how far they've shifted the Overton window. But again, I maybe I'm just an eternal optimist here. I look at a place like Arizona, which again, not a super blue state, right? A purple state, classic swing state, which overwhelmingly at the ballot, when voters were given a chance to vote on this, passed a ballot measure requiring much stricter disclosure of dark money. Is that going to change the world? No. Is it a reflection of what the public actually wants? Absolutely. And that's where real movements, to my mind, that's where that really starts.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not just Arizona. We're seeing it in other places like Maine, where they passed by huge bipartisan majorities a bill to basically ban super PACs. And the Supreme Court has never officially weighed in on the constitutionality of super PACs. Everybody sort of just assumes that they're okay after Citizens United, but that's going to put real pressure on that.
There's not a grassroots. There's not a grassroots constituency out there for yes, please come and buy my congressman. Like it's just not a grassroots constituency for that.
Right, exactly. And so, and to your point, it's a major breakdown of democracy when, common sense, things that everybody seems to want cannot be made into law that can hold through Supreme Court manipulation, effectively, is what we're left with, which is why continuing to keep pressure on the court has to remain such a vital cornerstone of any democracy restoration in this country. Before we lose you, David, I wanted to ask you about the lever. It's been such an incredible addition to the information landscape, to the news landscape since you launched it a few years ago. Tell us what brought you to needing to do this. We don't see this type of coverage in mainstream outlets. You're reader supported. How can folks learn more about you? Why did you start it, and what are you doing?
Thanks so much for asking. Look, I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for a long time. I had worked in campaigns to start. I did take a hiatus to go work for the first politician on Capitol Hill I ever worked for, who was Bernie Sanders 20, 30 years ago. I took a hiatus to work for him on his presidential campaign. And after the presidential campaign, I basically decided, look, the issues that Bernie Sanders was campaigning on simply do not get enough attention. Forget about what side of the issues you're on. They simply do not get enough attention. So what I wanted to do was use my investigative journalism experience to try to build out something, by the way, bigger than me. I didn't want it to just be like me going off. I wanted to build an entity that does this kind of investigative accountability journalism, holding public officials and corporations accountable. I wanted to build an entity that could do that on a daily and weekly basis. And that's what we do. And we are reader supported. So everyone listening, go over to levernews.com and check out what we do. Sign up for our free email newsletter. You will see we are holding people accountable every single day, and our reporting, it makes a real impact in exposing what's going on, which brings pressure on the politicians to not do the kinds of things that we're talking about. So that's what I wanted to do. Look, it's like swimming upstream in a media world where it's very noisy and sort of everything other than the class war gets attention. But the class war, to my mind, is the central defining feature of this era that we're living in. And the corruption allows that class war to be intensified. And that's why we focus on it so much.
Well, I'm a subscriber, David. I really appreciate every time I see the lever in my inbox. And I also wanted to underscore something you said and Alex said about that this court is not going to save us.
Right.
This court is not going to save us. I have a book coming out about that, about Without Precedent, about John Roberts and the corruption of this court. But you have a book coming out, and I want readers to be able to find it. Where can they get your book? And can you tell us a little bit more about the book before we wrap?
Sure. So we did an audio series called Master Plan. Everyone can go in their podcast app, search the term Master Plan. You will find this audio series about the secret 50-year history of the effort to legalize corruption. And what we did, because we know some people don't listen to podcasts, we've now turned it into a book. So you can find all of that on our website at levernews.com. And it is a product of investigative journalism. This is not just punditry. This is these are the receipts. You will find them. It is footnoted. And some of the stuff, I'm telling you, will blow your mind. We talked about the Powell memo. I could just give you a little taste of it. We dug up. Lewis Powell was, of course, the Supreme Court justice who did a lot of this stuff, and he wrote this memo about how the conservative movement needed to use money to take over American politics. We found this amazing record of when he was literally a vinyl record of when he was nominated to the court, where it was Philip Morris throwing a party for him. And it's a recording of that party. And he, on the front of the record, there's a picture of him where the Philip Morris executives are giving him a judicial robe with corporate logos on the judicial robe. I mean, what a metaphor that is. And that when we found that, it was like, this is another illustration of the fact that none of this was an accident. This was all truly part of a very specific master plan to take over our government.
I mean, it really is just such an extraordinary, amazing, jaw-dropping podcast. Please, our listeners, our watchers, go and subscribe to The Lever. Also, please subscribe to Legal AF here on the Midas Touch Network. David, please come back and join Alex and I, or separately or together, anytime you want to talk about breaking stories. We're such fans of your work, and we're so grateful for the fans of this network, the Midas Touch Network. I'm Lisa Graves with Court Accountability. Thank you for joining us, and please come back soon and join us for our next episode, shining a light on these really important issues that are affecting our lives. Thank you all.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.